hands, however, Otis and other white patriots did not see the abolition of slavery as a central goal of the new republic. Anti-slavery sentiment was widespread during the Revolutionary era and generated considerable consensus against American participation in the African slave trade. But the importation of slaves was the only aspect of slavery, as it was practiced in the United States, that the white man who led the American Revolution even contemplated abolishing at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. And rather than requiring its abolition, the Constitution, they wrote, prohibited Congress from banning the slave trade before 1808, and did not require it to end thereafter, laying a very tentative sanction on a form of commerce already on its last economic legs. To be sure, anti-slavery activity was more vigorous on the state level, as well as among individual whites. The decades after the revolution saw the passage of a series of gradual emancipation laws, which eventually ended slavery in the northern states. Likewise, this year witnessed a wave of manumissions undertaken by slaveholders in both the North and the Upper South, who more moved to renounce bondage by the liberating influence of the Revolution or the Great Awakening, which posed its own evangelical challenges to the sin of slavery. But despite slavery's uneasy relationship with both evangelical Christianity and Republican ideology, white anti-slavery activists of the Revolution era, as Patricia Bradley notes, failed to make the issue central to national identity.
So right now we're about the halfway component of our first reading. I wanted to check with you and see what you've gathered from the reading thus far. How did you feel about the reading and its vocabulary? We'll start with those two questions, and then I'll further elaborate more.
Sure. So I think most of the vocabs are comfortable for me, but like I got stuck in several of the words. I think because my major is biochemistry, and I did not like get so familiar with some of the words, I think in history or like just sociology parts, and some of them like manumissions, it's just like a word I did not see, so I have to stop and just like read it by my intuition. I think it's manumission, but I'm not sure. Like several words are like that. And for
no, I was listening.
Yeah. And for the whole passage, I think mostly until now, it's like talking about how after the Revolution War, the efforts from different parts to end slavery and different perspectives on this issue, like how there are several people who propose anti-slaverism, but like the constitution is not really like ready to move forward to ban the slavery. Instead, it's just like actually hindered the progress, I think. And just like how different people showed their opinions in their own codes and in their own writings, I think.
What context clues did you receive that from? Do you feel like there was distinctive references to specific words, or maybe literature, maybe historical events? What do you think curbed you to create the assumption of what you are reading?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? It's just like the internet connection, I think.
Oh, of course. I was just asking what context clues were given to give you the idea. Maybe there was some vocabulary or some historical references or some just specific details that were presented that made you create this idea of what you were reading.
So I think one sentence I noticed is on the middle of the second paragraph on this page. Like, and rather than requiring its abolition, the Constitution, they wrote, prohibited Congress from banning the slave trade before 1808 and do not require it to end thereafter. I think, like in the middle, like after and rather than requiring its abolition. Yeah. So I think this sentence makes a little bit contrast with previous like goals of ending slave trade and anti-slavery, and this part moved to how like Constitution actually prohibited Congress from banning the slave trade. I think this part is like what I gain most from, because it's making a contrast with previous passage and just like stating a little bit difference between the interests of individuals and the general public versus the Constitution.
Okay, awesome. So for the last two questions, I want to ask you, could you describe the setting of this historical time period? And also, why do you think the author wrote this? Like, what do you feel as if though this is an important thing to talk about?
So I think this context was like right around the Declaration of Independence. Like it stated that all Americans have the, I think it's right of liberty, and just like slavery is against that value. Therefore, slavery, according to different perspectives, should be banned, and all the white and black people should enjoy the same level of liberty from this in this country. And I think this overall context is talking about during the history how different parties or like groups made their effort to end the slavery. I think it's a history discussion, like how people made their efforts into banning slavery, but also like how this has influenced American history and how this has maybe reflected different ideologies at that time and right now. I think this is what this passage is going at.
Awesome, thank you so much. So what I'll have to continue doing is that was our mid like analysis of the reading. So I want to confirm that you felt comfortable with the reading. So we'll continue on, and I'll just do the exact same thing, but for the second portion, we'll do a retroflective analysis. So that's more, this part is just more for me to say out loud for the document purposes. So I'll highlight when you get to, after you finish this little small blurb on the next 2 pages where you'll stop. Like you'll stop right at this bold mark, okay?
Okay.
Awesome. You can start whenever you're ready.
Sure. The same, however, cannot be said of the nation's Black population, for whom, as Benjamin Quallers has observed, the revolution was truly revolutionary. Among the enslaved, the revolution fostered what Gary Nash has called the largest slave uprising in American history, inspiring tens of thousands of bondsmen and bondswomen to flee their masters for the British. Moreover, it had an equally profound effect among the Black Americans who remained with the Patriots. The American Revolution, as we see in the writings of Lamont Haynes, offered American Africans new conceptions of liberty and natural rights, which informed and defended their attempts to liberate themselves as a people. Long before 1776, as Peter Wood has noted, the experience of enslavement very likely ensured that African Americans thought longer and harder than any other sectors of the population about the concept of liberty, both as an abstract ideal and as a tangible reality. Not until the revolution, however, did they acquire a powerful and commonly accepted lingua franca that could express their aspirations for liberty. Inextricably entwined with American nationality from the very start, Black abolitionism took shape during the Revolution era and encompassed not only challenges to the legality of slavery in the new republic, such as the one posed by Haynes, but also the long Black struggle for freedom and civil rights in the new Northern states. Looking back on that struggle in 1844, the ever-eloquent Black abolitionist and physician James McQueen Smith observed that freedom has bound us to American institutions with a tenacity that nothing but death can overcome. Black Americanism and Black abolitionism, however, are rarely discussed in tandem in scholarship on African American thought or abolitionism. The convergence between these two inextricably entwined elements of African American intellectual history is all too often lost in a historiography on Black thought that assesses much of the 19th century Black thought and politics in relationship to Black rather than American nationalism, and the historiography of abolitionism that typically begins with William Lord Garrison's conversation to a commitment to the immediate abolition of slavery in 1830s. Unlike the history of white abolitionism, which usually starts with Garrison's rejection of gradual emancipation and schemes for the American colonization of American blacks, Black abolitionism has no canonical story of its origins. Recent revisionist works on abolitionism have begun to stress the central role free blacks played in Garrison's conversion to immediatism, which, although acknowledged by Garrison, has not always been recognized by historians. Still, the question of exactly where the African Americans who influenced Garrison got their ideas remain underexplored. Studies of Black abolitionism, such as Benjamin Corliss, Black Abolitionist, Jane H. Peace, and William H. Peace, They Who Would Be Free, The Black Search for Freedom, 1830 to 1861, and Patrick Rilke's Black Identity and Protest in the Antebellum North, pick up in the antebellum era. Written over a span more than 30 years, all three books locate the beginning of this movement in free Black opposition to the American Colonization Society, a white organization founded in 1816 that was dedicated to sending free Blacks to Africa. The story may well begin earlier, however. The Black anti-colonization movement that mobilized shortly after the ACS inaugural meeting drew an anti-slavery conceptions of America that African Americans had championed since the very dawn of the Revolution era. Forged in a crucible of slavery, servitude, and racial discrimination, African American ideas about liberty and the new nation were all the more powerful for being so difficult to realize and gave coherence and character to the long Black struggle for abolition. This essay explores the foundation of Black Americanism and abolitionism, tracing the multitude of links between the two.
Okay, so that was currently our first reading that was not culturally relevant. Just before we continue on to the final reading, I just want to confirm and understand, what did you gather from the reading? What did you feel like you learned from the reading? And I will give you a prompt later that will be a written response and reflection, and a more also like a small expert, like an argumentative, explanatory, or historical analysis. But currently, what did you feel like you comprehended from this reading?
So I think this part is about like introduction about this book's main argument, like how the author developed this thought like of exploring Black nationalism and abolitionism, and also how different scholars have researched around this area, and the importance of his research, I think, quite mentioned a little bit. But the thing I noticed is that, like, for the second part, the sentence is more like complicated, I would say. When I read through this passage, I feel like there are more long sentences, and while I'm reading, it's a little bit harder for me to comprehend the meaning of the whole sentence if it's too long. And I think the second part is definitely more professional and more scholarly than the first part. I feel like in this part, it talks more about how Black abolitionism is different from white abolitionism, and the history of that ideology and how the author is going to explore this part.